time now. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our session, Scaling Access to Affordable Housing Across the Country. It's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. My name is Antonella. I am a director of Bloom Product at Exygy. Exygy is a digital consultancy firm that focuses its work on social impact. We partner with government agencies and nonprofits and philanthropists to build and design solutions for critical problems of our society. We are the creators of Bloom, a platform for people to apply for affordable housing. We started this work in San Francisco. We expanded then to Alameda County, San Mateo County, and the city of San Jose. And recently, this year, we started this work with the city of Detroit. And very, very soon, we'll be launching Detroit Home Connect. So today, we want to talk to you about, the journey that we have all been through together, as well as our lessons learned, as well as anything that you might want to know. And we're going to have a live discussion, and we definitely going to leave at least 15 minutes for questions at the end. In terms of logistics, let's make sure that you post your questions on the tab that says Q&A. I know there are two tabs. You will see chat, but please direct your questions on the Q&A so we make sure that we read them. Probably if we have many questions, we might not be able to cover all of them. So feel free to leave your email and reach out to us by LinkedIn or by this platform so we can continue the conversation afterwards. Well, without further ado, let's get started, panelists. I'm very excited to kick off this panel. So I would like for each of the panelists to introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns, your organization, as well as something that you are excited to discuss today. Sophia, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Sophia Merchant. I use she, her pronouns. I am a policy analyst on the Policy Development and Implementation team at the City of Detroit Housing Revitalization Department. In short, our department manages and stewards federal, state, and local dollars for affordable housing and community development projects. And one thing I'm excited about today is to listen to everyone's questions and see how people are excited about affordable housing solutions.
Happy to go next. Hi, all. I'm Erin on the Google.org team, and that's our corporate philanthropy, and I lead our civic fellowships. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm excited to understand what the questions are and how we might be able to help bring Bloom to more cities across the country. So thank you. Over to you, Gabe.
Thanks so much, Erin. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabe Doss. I am a program manager at Google.org. I manage U.S. fellowships alongside Erin. And we work to bring the best of Google and our expertise to nonprofits, social enterprises, and governments. Before coming to Google.org, I worked in tech and entrepreneurship at the University of Michigan School of Business. I'm a lifelong Detroit project. More exciting for me. Really excited to talk today about the impact of user design on our work with cities.
Thank you, panelists, for the introduction. So I think we can now get started with our questions. First, let's discuss the problem space. What is the problem that we are all trying to solve? I would love for you to share a little bit more from the perspective of your organization and also your insights around how Bloom came to be. Sophia, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll give just a broader kind of policy context on the question, the question we're trying to solve here with Bloom. Is essentially, we have a national affordable housing crisis in the country. There's not enough of it for all those who need it. It affects every municipality from coast to coast. The National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates that the U.S. is facing a shortage of like 7 million rental homes that are affordable and available to extremely low income renters. And, this kind of disproportionately impacts communities of color, especially those like Detroit. And so, I think, affordable housing and housing stability are integral to like household stability and people's like ability to like succeed and have good education outcomes. So, the problem is important and far reaching. For us in Detroit, the affordable housing policy is probably one of the most intimately felt policy areas. We would say, average median income for a household in Detroit is around $33,000, and a third of our residents live in poverty. And so when we think about need, this is a policy issue that affects a sizable segment of our population rather than a smaller segment. And so, from our department's perspective, every year we funnel, millions of dollars of federal, state, and local dollars to kind of fund affordable housing preservation and development. So new units, preserving old units that may expire and flip into market rate. So while you're dealing with that kind of issue of supply, there's a separate issue of how do people find the units that are actually available right now, right? So affordable housing, especially regulated affordable housing that's regulated by governmental subsidies, relies on a lot of, you would say, kind of tried and true rudimentary marketing measures, right? People will learn about things through word of mouth. People will learn about things through lawn signs, just driving around. And so we wanted to figure out what's a way that can be an equalizer, like a digital helping hand to find affordable housing for residents. It's like access to fair housing issues to make sure that everyone understands what affordable housing opportunities are out for them. And so, from Detroit's perspective, we kind of embarked on this partnership with Google.org and Exygy to understand, like, how do we help the resident who calls us asking, I need affordable housing, where do I look? And so that's the policy question at the back of this product development. And I'll turn it over to Erin to kind of talk about more locally how this problem manifested.
Yeah, I actually have the pleasure of introducing why and how Bloom came to be. So just a little bit of a backstory, actually. In January 2012, the mayor's office of civic innovation in San Francisco was founded. And soon after, they started a program called Civic Bridge. And they were actually really facing a similar challenge to what Detroit has described, since we recognize it is a national issue. And their program is designed to engage private companies to help support and advance tech solutions to address pressing challenges. Unfortunately, the Google.org fellowship program that Gabe and I support is designed to do something very similar. So we embed teams of Googlers to work pro bono, full-time, and with civic entities embedded within their organizations to build innovative tech solutions to address some of these challenges. So when the city of SF approached Google.org to see how we might be able to help residents find and apply to affordable housing in San Francisco through this program, we really believed that with Googlers' unique talents paired with the city's deep knowledge and expertise of the problem space, there could really be a tangible solution that we co-create together. So we went down this path, and back then, before our fellowship program was officially what it is today, we provided a small pro bono team to really dig into who is the user or intended user of this solution, making sure that we started with research and design work to really understand how we might make this most accessible to those users. And then we started to define the requirements for a solution that is now called DAHLIA, which is San Francisco's affordable housing portal. Back then, I was reminded when catching up with the city of San Francisco last week that we really encouraged them and the city to build this as an open source solution so that others could benefit from it. And I am really glad that we all did and that the city decided to do that because, that has gone on to, from there, after our program ended, the city went ahead, used the requirements that we helped to define to partner with Exygy to build out what we all know today as Bloom. And Bloom has gone on now to be deployed in different counties and cities, as Antonella mentioned. And then we had the pleasure of collaborating with the city of Detroit last year to provide them with a team of Google.org fellows over the course of a total of 9 months in the end to design, build, and implement an affordable housing portal that really took into consideration some of the local context and important factors that Detroit needed to address and include in the portal for it to be a success locally there. And so fortunately, too, grateful to have Gabe here, who was one of the Google.org fellows and has since come over to the google.org team full-time, and he will be able to share more about that collaboration and that experience together. But I just want to say too that we're proud to have played a very small part in bringing that initial portal to life with the city of San Francisco, and for their vision to create this. We really just provided the human capital to help jumpstart that initiative. It was their vision and their desire to create such a portal that we now see has so many benefits for residents who are trying to access affordable housing and who should have that access at their, readily available to them. So back to you, Antonella.
Thank you, Erin. Indeed, the cross-sector collaboration was critical in scaling the solution. We are very excited to share that we are also in active and advanced conversations with different jurisdictions across the US, like at the state level, at the regional level, as well as at the city level. We'll be happy to share more if people are interested. And the other thing that I think will be helpful for everyone is understanding a little bit more of like what the solutions entails. So basically, Bloom is a portfolio of 3 products. It has one, the most important one is the public-facing one, the one where we provide the ability for residents, home seekers, to look for affordable housing in a standardized way. There is a lot of work behind being able to provide users with like the same level of experience that you will experience if you go to Zillow or Airbnb to look for housing. We take a lot of pride and a lot of work in maintaining that level of experience, as well as accessibility across the site and of course devices. The second product is focused on property managers and developers. It's allowing them the ability to post listings on their own, edit any information that they need, have pre-filled information to make it very easy and quick for them to edit anything that they need. The trickiest part, of course, is kind of the policy housing requirements. And then the third product is for the jurisdictions that are investing on this platform, for allowing them to see all the data that is critical for them to make later policy decisions, as well as the data around the applicants, and then data in general around reporting. One thing that is critical for us as we scale Bloom is to make sure that we meet jurisdictions and communities where they are at. So even though we have this standardized solution, we definitely not implement it as like apples everywhere. We really do have like active, intense conversations to understand what are the specific goals of each jurisdiction and each community. What are the things that we might need to customize so we can surface those things early on? What are the things that we will need to validate with different stakeholders? What is all the landscape of stakeholders that we will need to bring on board? We create different community conversations, convenings, and Safia will talk more about that. I'm sure Gabe will also add more details about that, but definitely that's a huge portion of the success of Bloom. And then the other thing that I want to call out is that maybe one specific goal that we have seen in Detroit, for instance, when I talk that even though jurisdictions are facing the same problems, they have particular challenges. So for instance, in Detroit, one of the biggest concerns is like building quality. So the HRD is really curious to see how we can implement, introduce more quality indicators information. And that's something totally new. And each time we receive those type of concerns, we are definitely embracing them. We just don't say, no, that's not included. We haven't done that. We are definitely open. And same, like, as I was mentioning, we have 3 products in this portfolio, but we don't impose to jurisdictions that they have to take all. We know that, for instance, for some jurisdiction, implementing a common application is really challenging. So yeah, we'll definitely open to kind of move things around and not have that feature available if that's not the case, or make sure that we bring all the stakeholders on board before, before we ship that. Okay, that hopefully was helpful context. So maybe we can move on to the next question. which is about going deeper into the particularities of each community. We know that Detroit is super different from San Francisco and the Bay Area where we have been working for many, many years. So yeah, we wanted to share a little bit more of like what are the things that we have done to make sure that we meet and are user-centered to those communities. Safia, do you want to start sharing a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I would say like top of mind for us in Detroit when we were thinking about how to adopt Bloom was like, how do we make sure that what we have is essentially serving the most vulnerable user or the user with the highest barriers, right? And that for our community can actually represent a wide span of the population. And so that's kind of leaked into conversations then about like product design and making things simpler than one would expect, and then adding extra explanations like into like parts of like property listings, maybe simplifying language. So we've kind of taken a lot of those lessons into kind of design of the product. Another consideration that we've had is sort of having an honest conversation with ourselves about what do our relationships with our stakeholders look like right now, and like how does that relate to the kinds of product developments we can do and on what timeline, right? So for us right now, we are like building relationships with property management companies, strengthening those bonds and like understanding their needs as well. And so we're very cognizant of making sure that we don't implement things onto them without them. But making sure that they're equal partners and building property listings, building features, and then, being able to have those more open conversations of what does pushing the needle look like more, like in terms of launching a common app. So those are some of the ways that are considerations that we had top of mind once we decided to kind of work with Exygy.
Thank you, Safia. Gabe, do you want to go next?
I can definitely add to that. One of the things that resonated with me the most from what Antonella mentioned is the goal of meeting cities where they are. And I think that was a huge part of the Google.org fellowship work with the city of Detroit. Detroit is notably very different from the Bay Area. And I believe one thing that was called out is that there is no common application in Detroit. There is no housing lottery. And so even sort of at face value, taking what had been done with Bloom and the DAHLIA iteration in the Bay, and really looking at how to translate that to Detroit, there were just some very tangible features that either needed to be added or would not be present. And so I think that needs assessment of the city was a really, really critical part to trying to build for the city of Detroit. Also, when we just think about how those users might perceive a site like this, particularly on the Bay Area iteration, we're surfacing housing that is available, right? Where we are actively accepting applications. Whereas in Detroit, we've seen, and Safia educated our fellows on this, that the housing market is really brutal. And the odds that there will just be a listing sitting for weeks at a time that folks can apply to is a little less realistic. So we have to reset expectations there and understand, how do we provide housing seekers with the information they are looking for to, dependably connect with the property manager in a property, get all the information that they might need as it relates to costs or how they might apply a voucher, and then plan ahead, right? And get on a wait list, because it's not going to be a lottery. And so those were things that we had to really put on a new Detroit lens to tackle and incorporate into product design, as Safia mentioned.
Thank you, Gabe. And yeah, let's dive deeper into the challenge of like uncovering the particular needs and the lens that we definitely need to take into consideration. I think it will be helpful to share a little bit more about how we use iterative user research and testing to actually make sure that we uncover the particularities of Detroit. Safia, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So just to kind of go over first, like more broadly, what our engagement process was for this project. So we started out last year kind of doing sort of a community roadshow, essentially, of understanding people's like baseline needs when it came to what were the challenges when trying to find affordable housing. That kind of started like that allows us to have initial discussions of what were pain points and what were concerns that residents had. A lot of things that came up in terms of themes, besides kind of like general ways that people, general filters or search mechanisms that people wanted, people also had a lot of concerns about running into scams, which is very prevalent here in Detroit, and wanted to really understand property transparency. Who's the management company? Who's the developer? You know, what are these quality indicators? Because affordability aside, property quality is a huge issue in Detroit. And so, you know, that's something that we've tried to take and implement in small ways throughout product development by having like more transparent property management, contact information. And we'll probably within our next round of design, we'll probably try to understand what are the building quality indicators that would mean most to residents or would be most valuable. And that would then be incorporated into later versions of the website. So after we did kind of those initial sessions, we started user testing the website and understanding, you know, what were pain points for users. And we did a ton of testing with property managers just to understand, you know, what fields would they be comfortable entering in, you know, what was pertinent to their own needs as property managers. And I think, you know, that helped really illuminate maybe different things that we needed to simplify on the partners portal side. In terms of like an example of user testing that kind of shaped product, I would say when it comes to accessible housing, so our disability justice community has been a really vocal advocate for the idea that, you know, there's just not enough accessible, affordable housing, and it's hard to find. And properties often don't really even understand what accessible housing features are in their own properties. And so we've kind of changed the back end to be more of a checkbox of accessible housing features so that we're not relying on kind of like free text where property managers who are not well versed in this space, they may not immediately think of those housing features that they have. They may not know that they have grab bars. And so we've kind of changed parts of that back end so that we can have more valuable data to the front end. And so those are all things that we've kind of done through this process. Not everything we'll be able to implement by launch, but these are priorities that we're having as we kind of use that agile development process to change the website over time.
Thank you, Sophia. Gabe, is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of like how you make sure that the research findings are incorporated into the product roadmaps and we really like make decisions based on what we heard from the different stakeholders?
Absolutely. Yes, and I think for context for everyone, in terms of the Google.org fellowship with the city of Detroit, we had a team composed of software engineers, product managers, program managers, UX researchers and designers, and marketers from all across Google. And so that's a really big part of our fellowship program, is bringing those different types of expertise to the table. And I can say that Google.org was not the expert in the room for these conversations. And I think that was a really early discovery for us. And likewise, I think there was a sort of shared humility across with the city of Detroit as well, to sort of take a step back and center housing seekers, caseworkers who are doing this work in partnership with people trying to find homes, and many of those community entities who are much closer to this issue. And so I think in partnering really closely with those community-based organizations, it was through the user experience studies, right, that we were able to identify, you know, who are our users, who are the most vulnerable populations, and how do we design for them? Those are seniors, those are folks with disabilities, those are folks with, you know, various literacy challenges as well. And so the ability to filter by accessibility or by age and by income factor, it was through those studies that we would be able to prioritize features like that we don't typically see in the affordable housing space. It was through those studies that we were able to really center in on what does it mean to take a mobile first approach with accessibility and literacy in mind. And even, you know, in terms of language, right? Getting down to the fact that, hey, there are 3 commonly used or most commonly used languages in Detroit, right? What does it look like to use Google Translate, right? Or open source APIs along with help from Googlers to try to make that site available in the 3 most common languages and make it accessible as possible. The last piece I'll add here that Sophia was a huge champion for was how do we educate people on this world of affordable housing within this portal, right? If they're encountering terms like AMI for the very first time, then that could be a trigger for them to leave the site. And so are there resources, are there inroads to find out more information, to get a definition of these terms? Those are some of sort of the, base level, meeting the user where they are approach that we took to making sure that this was a user-centered project.
Thank you, Gabe. And from a product perspective, I would also like to add that in terms of ensuring that research findings are used, we feel it's critical to have what's called like an outcome-based roadmap, where like all the teams have really a lot of clarity around what are kind of the ultimate goals that we are trying to achieve, because sometimes it's easier to have engineers and researchers working in isolation, or feeling that, especially the researchers, that sometimes they feel that, well, our synthesis didn't mean to go into that direction, or it's a pity, it's unfortunate that you just took these from the synthesis and from the presentation that we did. Or like for engineers to just be focused on like the solutions, the features. So we all do a lot of efforts in terms of have research and strategic ceremonies, discussions, and a lot of like conversations across all of us, all our teams, to be able to really have the users at the center, and the feedback that we receive from the different touch points that we have with stakeholders, at the center. I feel like other thing that is important is have clarity around the workflows and the dependencies across the teams, and set realistic timelines. Sometimes if you're going to have a site visit, let's say at the end of March, and then you are planning to finalize prototypes early April, and then ship something by end of April, it's like, hey, how much time you really have to dive deep into your research findings? So I feel like taking the time, I know we all want to be agile, we all want to ship value as often as we can, but sometimes I think it's important to really take a step back and be thoughtful about the timelines, and having ceremonies after a critical research round to make sure that we will all be able to deep dive on those findings. And the last piece I would like to share around that is making sure that we also have that same level of attention after important convenings. One of the recommendations that Sophia HRD adopted from the Bay Area experience is having a steering committee. In the Bay Area, it has proved to be very successful to have kind of monthly or bi-monthly steering committees, where we convene champions like developers, property managers, housing counselors, as well as city staff and housing experts. And then we discuss critical product and design decisions that we are making about the platform. We also discuss critical policy questions, like policy requirements that we need to embed on the platform. And we really, like, as Gabe was saying, we are not the experts. We are just kind of the orchestrators of this platform. But then sometimes it's easy, to receive all this messy feedback, because those meetings are not easy. You have a lot of experts on the table, and sometimes it's hard to digest. And then you also want to ship things fast. And then it's like, okay, what all shall I take from what they said? What is critical to incorporate right now? What we might want to revisit later? And setting a ceremony to really revisit it later, it's important. So what we did, for instance, with Sophia, with other jurisdictions as well, is like make sure that after each steering committee, we have a debrief to make sure that, we decide what we must want to incorporate now, what can come later. And the other thing is like feeding feedback loops. Is like, hey, they invested time to provide insights. So like on the next steering committee or on the next convening, if we have community workshops, make sure that we bring back what we learned from them, what we decided to incorporate and what not, to basically incentivize that transparency and sense of like collaboration, and like how important they are for us to be successful. Okay, so like now we can move on to the next question. Like, what will Google.org and Detroit advice to other jurisdictions that are considering doing similar work than the one we have been doing till now?
Sure. I will take a stab at that first. Yeah, so I would say that there are a couple of like main lessons that we have, which I think could be applied to almost like any technology product you want to adopt, not just an affordable housing portal. But you definitely want to, while you focus on like product development decisions in the present moment, especially as a government employee, you're constantly trying to understand how do you plan for long-term sustainability and capacity to maintain that product, right? So, that is something that we've been working on here in Detroit and trying to understand, what combination of vendor support, internal staff can we have and be able to kind of rely on long term. So it's always good to have that plan, because like once you introduce a tool to the public, like they can rely on that tool. And you don't want to hit this point where you like fall off a cliff essentially. I would say that especially when you're launching an affordable housing portal, I mean, I think it can't be understated how important it is to have that expertise plus like the local context, the person who's the expert on the local context in that conversation. That way that you can make sure that your local needs are not being missed or maybe taken for granted or assumed during product development. That's often helped. And it's also allowed us to have a better and a realistic idea of what our stakeholders ready for at this moment, right, in terms of product development. And I think that I think there's like a comment in the chat here too that touches on this, which is, how do you kind of actually maximize the impact when it's tied to all these other policy issues? And I think that is the actual point that you kind of launch the product to also understand how do you pair this with other policy levers. Like a website won't be your like silver bullet solution to the housing crisis, but it can tackle one piece of the housing insecurity, like continuum of issues. And that's people having trouble finding it and having equal access to information. And so, if you are kind of trying to seriously like tackle that subject, you would optimally pair this with other policy interventions as well.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah. And I'll just want to first start with underscoring the first point Sophia made, because it is critical and really important to think out of the gate before you're even embarking on investing in any new technology or affordable housing portal, who will be the person who sustains and maintains the solution for years and years to come, and making sure that you're co-creating and ideally building with those partners. And in the case of different civic fellowships, we found that answer might be different based on the size or the resources or the approach that an individual civic entity may be comfortable taking. And so with Detroit and Sophia, we really, partnered with them to think through what the potential options might be, what made the most sense, knowing and understanding the constraints either in financial capital or human capital, but also wanting to be able to provide them the opportunity and Sophia's department the opportunity to really lean into the risk capital through our pro bono fellows that they could tap into to be able to invest in innovative technologies that they may otherwise not be able to if they were only relying on the resources available to them at that present moment. So I think, out of the gate, think about who might be the right organization partner in-house or otherwise who can help sustain and maintain that solution, and then bringing them in from day one to really co-create the solution alongside the experts in the department who really understand the needs of its intended users. And then I think another thing, Sophia said this as well, but tech is not the full solution. So there's so many other pieces of the puzzle to think about from a policy perspective, from a collaboration perspective. What partners and stakeholders do you need to get on board? I think this project was successful because of the mayor's strong endorsement and support out of the gate. And the mayor was an important stakeholder throughout, giving us feedback, asking really great questions. And I think Sophia has a fun story she can share about how that even helped unveil bigger issues for the mayor and for the city as well. And then lastly, I'll just say, I would encourage a healthy culture of retrospectives, which is where you're really looking back at the journey you've been on together. in increments of time that are pretty short. I mean, you can do them every 2 weeks, you can do them monthly, you can do them however often you'd like. But taking that moment to pause and to look back on how things are going, what could be improved, what could we be doing differently or better, so that, you know, you're not heading down a path because you've committed to go down that path, but rather really reflecting on what's working, what's not working, and pausing to identify what the gaps are and where you might need to change or pivot your approach or strategy. And I think on this project in particular, you know, we had a lot to learn on the Google.org fellowship side from Sophia and the team. And as we went through the journey, having that time to pause and reflect and discuss what was going well, what were some of the gaps that we were unsurfacing, we could really identify where we could contribute and add the greatest value during the course of the remaining fellowship, and make sure that we're, you know, even if it was different than what we thought or set out to do in the first place, like we wanted to tackle the highest priority needs that the city of Detroit had to make this portal come to life. And I think, you know, those retrospectives are a great way to continuously check in on that and revisit the path you're going down together.
Amazing. I'll add to that briefly, mostly underscoring what has already been said. But one big takeaway for me was the really deep investment that is necessary in coordination between you know, our housing efforts as well as our technical efforts in our IT departments. And you know, we found that it is important from a political perspective, from a resourcing and planning perspective, from a procurement perspective, just really diving into that work together and making sure that for the long-standing sustainability of whatever we're building, that there's that buy-in as to you know, how we will continue to upgrade, sustain, and amplify anything that is being built for users, right? Particularly in the housing space. And I would say the other big takeaway for me was continuing to use user research, right, to ensure that diverse perspectives are included in product development, and particularly when you are introducing technical solutions to historically underrepresented communities. And when I talk about diversity there, that's diversity of user, right? So getting perspectives across age, race, other backgrounds, but also working really cross-functionally. I think Sophia talked a lot about the work that we've done with property managers, or, you know, now sort of that board that works together to make these decisions. I think that's how we build sort of long-term buy-in for a project like this in a city, and being able to acknowledge that there are multiple users and stakeholders and build sort of equitably across those different groups ultimately results in a better product for the folks who need this the most.
Thank you, everyone. And before we jump into the Q&A, is there any last piece of advice that we would like to give to our attendees today?
I'm happy to share one. I think, you know, given that the summit theme is really building the path forward together, I, you know, really encourage governments to explore how they might leverage pro bono resources, programs like the Google.org Fellowship or otherwise, to help jumpstart some of these innovative tech solutions that you have on your wish list or in mind to serve your residents, you know, more efficiently or effectively. And you know, I'm a firm believer that we're better together. And as the expression goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I'm hopeful that we can see more companies offering such pro bono support to the sector, both nonprofit and the government sector, because I do think that the power of combining those efforts and the deep expertise that civic entities have and the relationships that they own and the scale and reach that they have to serve their residents is just really profound. And I'm hopeful that more organizations can be a part of supporting your efforts, Sophia, and the work that all of you tuned in are doing across the country.
Thank you, Erin. Sophia, Gabe, do you want to share anything else? If not, we can jump directly into questions and expand there. Thank you. Great. So we have received a few questions. Feel free to kind of keep adding them. In the meantime, I don't feel there is a need to bundle based on the ones we received. So let's try to cover them all. I feel like one that we got is a bit related to what you were sharing a little bit at the end around sustainability. This attendee would like to know a little bit more about the thoughts of both Google.org and the city of Detroit around supporting the platform long term.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Sophia lead with that one since I know that you spearheaded thinking about that out of the gate. So go ahead.
Sure. So one of the things that we thought about with this is that, we knew that this product probably wouldn't be done within 6 months, right? It didn't do justice to the user, to residents, to kind of rush product development and like get something out the gate, right? And so we immediately had to like think of a strategy that didn't rely on pro bono support anymore and became something that needed to be funded. We have an allocation through ARPA, relatively minimal compared to the size of other packages to help support this, the affordable housing portal. And so we are kind of strategically stretching those dollars as far as we can over 3 years to kind of keep this tool afloat. And in the meantime, we're working then with like Exygy to kind of co-create like what does a staffing solution look like in the future, right? What does like a vendor contract look like in the future? And that's the kind of way that we're going to figure out how to maintain support, which is that, right now the product is more costly because it's in the middle of development, but over time those costs will definitely decrease substantially once like initial product development is over, like any tech product. And so we're accounting for that.
Yeah, one more thing I would like to add is that sometimes we need to convince jurisdictions about like the importance of thinking of the long term or investing in like trying to grow their team, because running a digital product is not the same as running any other program. This is not a static site. This is a site that is like a service delivery site. So like we need to create a lot of awareness of like what that implies. Because yeah, the costs are gonna be higher. But as Sophia was saying, it's a fair big investment and then it decreases. But it's also super important to invest in the capacities of the teams. And I really like that in the case of Detroit, we didn't have to convince them about that. Like they asked us to include that goal from the very beginning when we were discussing contracting. Then when we got into contract, that's kind of one of our goals. And almost all our teams are involved into that long-term goal, and we are still thinking and discussing what that should look like of building internal capacities. Because it's just not about contractors; it's also about like thinking how to build those internal capacities in-house. Other thing that other jurisdictions are considering is having a local nonprofit, local community-based organization doing the work that we are currently doing. So for instance, in one of our jurisdictions, what we are doing is actually training a nonprofit to do all the work that we have been leading up to now, not the engineering work, because that's not their expertise. Their expertise is serving home seekers, but definitely that's a huge gap that we are trying to bridge with them, because they are not used to digital products at all, or doing any work that relates to some of kind of the agile way in which we work, or like the more active user research and validation that we do. So I also wanted to mention that model as a reference.
Yeah, and Tanella, thank you for raising both those points. I think that to your first point around capacity building, I think one of the things we often hear during the course or at the end of the fellowship is that more than even the value that the end deliverable brings, is the journey along the way and the learnings and capacity developed within the civic entity, but also for our Googlers who learn so much, often are working with different tech stacks or tools than they're used to working with. And so I think that that's part of the benefit as well, like you said, is really helping to, along the journey, sharing and co-creating together, having the civic entity and the fellows participate in every step of the project, whether it's a design sprint or the user research interviews, whatever it may be, really digging in so that we can build that capacity and develop that muscle so that civic entities can, if they'd like, maintain that in-house or take on additional projects down the road that might be able to tap into those muscles that they were able to flex.
And I promise this, the last thing I'm going to add here is that one like specific way in which we have support jurisdictions to build their internal capacities even was like rethinking their hiring process to make sure that they are able to attract talented that is hard to attract, because of course they are competing with private companies. We know that there is a salary gap. So yeah, that's one concrete step. We have also done sit in the interviews, shadowing them on how they implement like the new hiring process. We have sat in their hiring panels. So yeah, I also wanted to share that. Okay, I feel like we can move on to the next question. Grace is asking us a little bit more about like our user research process and what are kind of the artifacts that we use to make sure that we really leverage insights for the product roadmap, and how do we work with user research to develop them. Well, I would say that the first advice that I will give is to kind of do a user research audit on like, okay, how are you doing things now? What are the gaps that you might have? What are the things that your researchers might be telling you they feel that they can improve, or like the organization should improve? Same with engineers. We do a lot of retrospectives. I really like that Erin highlighted that point. We feel that we learn so much from the retrospectives, but sometimes what can happen is that retrospectives can be isolated or like focus on a team. Like the engineers do all their ceremonies and their retrospectives, and we have a scrum master. But sometimes when your team is getting bigger and bigger, it's hard to make sure that you bring the insights back to kind of all the other teams. So what we started doing is cross teams retrospectives, and we are able to surface a lot of things that we might want to pay more attention. We also used to have, we continue to have quarterly retreats, and that's where we learned that that context was super helpful, but not enough. There in those retreats, we share business context, we share product strategy reviews, user research insights. So what we started doing after that is having lengthy emails updates where we share all that's going on, and people can dive deep in per jurisdiction or like per work stream, per release, and that have proved to be very helpful. And then the other thing that I was mentioning is like the goals oriented, outcome oriented roadmap, and then having a specific ceremonies where we check findings, where we have the researchers kind of leading their findings, and we define the we wills. What are kind of design implications, product implications, or technical implications that we might want to pay attention on. I don't know if anyone else wants to share anything around Grace's question.
Yeah, sure. From like the fellowship perspective, you know, there, as we've mentioned a few times, we were time constrained, and so one of the ways that we tried to combat that was integrating user testing at a number of different stages. And so we kicked off our fellowship with a 3-week design sprint. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. It was as cross-functional as possible, bringing property managers to this, you know, to the same table as case managers and folks who are even seeking housing. And so that was a great place to start. We also, you know, did exercises to develop user personas to try to understand, of course, who we're designing for, and particularly mapping our features to those personas in ways so that we knew at, you know, bare minimum that we had a few priority features for some of our most vulnerable groups. We also use critical user journeys to sort of guide those discussions. And something that was really critical, I think, as we made more progress, was to prototype with users and to have them sort of test some of our initial designs. And we did this at least 3 different stages. That helped us, of course, identify, you know, bugs and basic technical issues, but also how things were being perceived, how, you know, images or color were or were not being used in the right way. And of course, the cornerstone of that was making sure that we compensated the folks who gave their time to do some of that user testing with us.
Safia, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Oh, no, I was just ready to respond to the other questions in the
Oh,
chat.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, then that's a good segue. Let's move to the next question. Yeah, Julie is asking us a very challenging question around metrics, isn't it? How do we measure the impact of specifically finding affordable housing
Right.
when there are so many other barriers and levers at play? For example, if someone uses the tool to find a housing opportunity, but there is a wait list or they are rejected, I imagine the impact is limited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, for sure. No, and I think, Julie, I think this is a fantastic point, right? I think, that at the end of the day, right, there isn't enough affordable housing that's affordable to Detroiters. I'm going to speak specifically about Detroiters. But I think that like when from like a policy perspective, what you see when it comes to like residents' experiences with the world, right, like housing insecurity is a spectrum of issues, right? So while like building the supply of affordable housing is like the ultimate end goal, it is also a long-term goal, right? Like that takes many years to actually come into play. And so one of the things we've heard is that we also have to figure out ways like as like public servants to help people on the daily. And one of the things that we heard are stories that remind me of this issue is, we talked to like a woman during one of our resident engagement sessions who said, she will go and look at an affordable housing property within 3 buses, meaning she takes 3 buses to go find anything and scope it out, right? What would it look like for us to cut that back so she could see from her own home, or maybe with a case manager from a nonprofit, oh, you're going to be eligible for this, that, and the other, right? And so you shouldn't even take 3 buses out there, right? Like, I don't want us to underestimate or overestimate the amount of information that's available to people and like the amount of time it takes during a housing search process. And when you add other barriers with that, like it exacerbates that process. And so for us, we see the tool as tackling this very specific issue of the housing insecurity kind of spectrum, right? Which is like, how do we make this information like equally accessible to all who have like, exposure or connection to a digital device, or to a nonprofit, a case manager, a family member who have digital devices. Recently, the federal government released guidance that, affordable properties need to stop relying on things like word of mouth, right, for marketing, because it is essentially, it kind of inhibits and prohibits access to housing, because not everyone will be able to pass by that house on Livernois. And so, that's kind of what we're viewing the website as a tool. I think also it's, we view like our website as being able to show other indicators like building quality that other private sector websites don't. And we kind of view it as a way to also understand, like, how can we put a threshold for building quality on this website? So whereas, residents might encounter other scams on other private sector websites or through social media, how can we vet that so that we can tell residents, okay, you will have this certain kind of experience when looking for housing? But yeah, so that's kind of how we're kind of framing that issue.
I think other things to add in terms of measuring success is how critical it is to have a comprehensive metrics of indicators where we continue monitoring quantitative as well as qualitative feedback, because the numbers cannot tell you the full story. And so analytics can tell you a few things around like where people are paying more attention, where people are dropping, what are things that we might need to revisit based on that. We also have a feedback form for people kind of to react quickly if they want to flag something or share their feedback. As we mentioned, we all do continuous user research, user testing. So I feel that that's for us has been one of the critical ways to really make sure we are being as impactful as we can be. I mean, Safia framed that in a very good way. Like, there is so much you can do with the platform, but definitely what we are trying to contribute is to systemic change. But definitely, unfortunately, we cannot do that on our own. And I feel like, Judy, you are mentioning something is like, what's happening after the person applies? And for instance, now in some of the jurisdictions where we are working with, that process is not in the portal. we then direct them to follow up with a property manager. So they can apply in many of our jurisdictions. They can apply online. The application is very easy. It's the same. We streamline the pre-application. Then they receive a number, so they know like what are the next steps that they can follow up. But it's really important, like what's happening next is something that we as Exygy, as Bloom, and then the jurisdictions, they don't have too much clarity. So it requires really cross-sector collaboration there to really understand and track what have happened with each applicant. The example of San Francisco is a little bit different because they have a big team and they are able to do more after people apply. But I would say the case of San Francisco is very, very particular because that also requires a lot of investment. And sometimes jurisdictions get excited of like, oh, I want to oversee all the property managers. I want to make sure that they do this and they do that. And it's like, perfect, who's going to maintain that? And then they realize that with 2-3 members monitoring this project, that's not enough. So that's the other side, of the coin.
And I know it sounds like the Q&A maybe isn't working, but I see a question from Kevin around whether there's considerations to partner with companies such as Redfin or Zillow. So Antonella or Sophia would love to hear your thoughts there.
Thank you, Erin, because I was not seeing that question. Partner, sorry, with Zillow or Rethink. Okay. I mean, actually, I think the universe is quite different because we are focusing on affordable housing, and usually the users that you see going into and benefiting from the other portals are quite different. We haven't had formalized talks. We did have conversations with technology companies that manage systems that property managers and big developers use about potential integrations. We have received kind of mixed feelings from property managers. They say that, well, actually, if you just give me a CSV file and then I can manipulate it how I want it, that's enough. And some others have said that it will be nice to do a deeper integration, but with deeper integrations come a lot of power, and like we need to be really careful of how that data is managed. And like sometimes we also heard from some city staff that they don't want to have the power of getting all that information because it's a risk, it's a liability risk. So yeah, that's also a spicy question, I would say.
I think the Q&A is back on. And I think there's like one more question from Shirley in there.
Do you want to address that one?
Yeah. So Shirley, I think that, I mean, this is obviously like also like a really good point, right? Which is that like the digital divide, like many communities is a big issue in Detroit. And I would say that, you know, we did take this into account. And one of the things that we are planning to do when this tool rolls out is doing like training essentially, right? So training with community agencies, nonprofits, you know, community groups, like a lot of organizations that will interface essentially with people who may not have access to the internet or a device, because we're trying to use this like train the trainer model. So if households themselves can't use it, what are the third spaces or the community organizations that can help people use that tool and benefit from it essentially, right? But you know, I think from just like an underlying understanding too is like, despite the digital divide issues, there's still a great deal of people who are in search of affordable housing in Detroit who also have access to the internet. And so, you know, it doesn't completely discount from making that tool, but then it just needs to be intentional how you roll out that tool and make sure agencies are equipped to, you know, help residents who don't have access to the internet or technology, which is, as you said, you know, an issue in Detroit for sure. Thank you for that question.
Well, thank you so much for all our panelists and for all our attendees. I'm very happy that it seems we were able to cover all the questions that we got so far, but please feel free to reach out to us. We would really like to continue the conversation. And yeah, you can reach out to us by LinkedIn or leave here any other questions, thoughts, suggestions, and your email address so we can follow up. Thank you again, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.